Got it.
Sorry about that.
All righty. So I guess I'll start in, and I do have some materials to share, which I'll put up in a moment. But as Margot and Donna and I spoke about the program, you know, from a data perspective, you know, all of my career, all of my time has been as a practitioner and user of data. So I really thought today to give you sort of a sense of sort of how I got to those roles, and then in my role as the CEO of healthcare, how data plays into our everyday existence and how it's changing, and just some of the key things that we are thinking about from a pressure perspective, not a clinical perspective, but more so from an enterprise pressure perspective, operating as a healthcare leader. So if you'll give me a quick second, and this was actually sent out so you can have those materials to for yourself. So we went through introductions, but just a little bit about, you know, just the way in all of my career using data in every single role as a user, grappling with how to define data, grappling with being data rich and information poor. But, you know, really as I started my career path, a lot of international work, a lot of, you know, understanding of, you know, both economic and regulatory data, cross-border issues, a lot of heavy operational strategic work combined with finance. So doing a lot of optimization work, startup work, emerging market business development work, a lot of transactions along the way, meaning I was buying, selling, merging, divesting, and really moved to healthcare in 2016, which has been, you know, an extraordinary privilege to serve in the healthcare space. And so a lot of one part that we'll talk about today is my focus as a leader in around culture, because a lot of times when we talk about data, an organization, it's changing in the way in which we think about the organization and the cultural aspects of organizations, and the data, trying to understand how to foster the right culture to foster performance. A couple of things about just the types of companies that I've been with. Every environment was very different and all had really important lessons. So I've been in some very large, sophisticated environments that were, you know, quite large, multinational, $14 billion, $40 billion. And then I've been in some very small startups, and where you're doing really exciting things by day, and on Friday night you're cleaning out the refrigerator when you're walking out the door in the kitchen, right? So a whole host of environments, and every environment had really important lessons around, you know, really what I needed to have in my toolbox. The last 6 years, I'll talk a little bit about this. The last 6 years, I was the chief financial officer of a publicly traded company called Alliance Healthcare Services. And then I became the president and chief executive officer in 2018. And then we recently sold the company to Acumen, and I served with the founder as his president and co-CEO as we transitioned the organization together. And I just wrapped up last week. A big smile on my face. It's been a lot of fun and quite a journey to bring two really powerful platforms together. And just a little bit about what this platform does in healthcare. So, you know, at the heart of what we do, we partner with hospitals across the country, and we treat patients on behalf of hospitals, both in radiology, so largely advanced imaging, so PET-CT, MRI services, as well as cancer, radiation therapy, and a little bit of medical oncology. So we, as a company, are across 46 states. We actually serve over 1,000 hospital relationships. So I try to tell people, if you've ever gone to, say, a Brigham and Women, they may have an outpatient site. We don't have the Brigham and Women's contract, but you know, you could go to an outpatient site for advanced imaging. You could go to an outpatient site for radiation therapy, and it potentially could be run by us underneath, but branded with the hospital. And we oftentimes joint venture with our hospitals and really focus on, exceptional patient care, high quality service line operational management. So today the company serves about 1,000 hospitals, about 2 million patients a year come through our various operations. And we have over 200 fixed sites, either cancer centers or multimodality or single modality imaging, as well as we have a large mobile fleet that moves across, 1,000 hospitals or just shy of 1,000 hospitals for shared diagnostic imaging. So that's the context of, as I talk to you about healthcare, I talk a lot about the hospital environment as they are key partners. We spend our time, bread and butter, with our hospitals, but many of the issues that the hospitals are contending with are the same issues for healthcare providers and other healthcare organizations across the ecosystem. So, I really decided as I thought about data, what, as a healthcare CEO, what keeps me awake at night? There's a million things that keep me awake at night, but as a healthcare CEO, it is a constant battle to really deliver high quality and compassionate patient care when there are just tremendous financial industry pressures. So not only ensuring that you do the right things operationally to continue to deliver high quality patient care, but then you also do the things organizationally to continue to keep your team motivated and engaged and part of the mission. So I thought I would talk about data and just what the, some of the battles in healthcare that we're dealing with from a financial and industry pressure. There are many pressures from a clinical perspective. So I'm really talking more from sort of the financial and industry perspective and not going to get into, technical clinical necessarily, but thought I would share some insights, some experiences and how things are changing, and happy to answer any questions along the way. So there's many pressures in healthcare, but when you look at the financial pressures and that sort of balance of bringing, high quality care and all of the ways in which the environment is, pressuring that space. You look today, you think about staffing shortages, the Great Resignation. It's tremendous in healthcare, especially post-COVID. What we're seeing, where we saw a lot of flight from healthcare in 2020, just for the sheer logistics of families having to take care of children at home who were not in school and were not in another environment, and trying to balance that economic equation. But certainly staffing shortages and people just saying, I'm done, right? And trying to keep that organization motivated. And then you have just tremendous pressure from a financial perspective, rising costs, continuing across every part of the ecosystem. You've got downward pressure on reimbursement. And then you've got a really important payment reform and moving from fee for service to value-based care, and all really important moves, but also places a really interesting pressure point on organizations in terms of how you have to invest and how you have to think about that equation and the data that's required to successfully operate. And then lastly, consumerism has really shifted healthcare, and who's making the decision, who are the influencers in the decisions, and how the patient today has become much more of a consumer than say 20 years ago when your physician gave you a referral, you just followed that chain. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these four. I'll be very brief, hopefully, in my comments. I'll move quickly, but happy to take questions. If it makes sense at the end, we can do so. But I'll talk a little bit about staffing shortages, and just this is an area I could talk on for a long time, but it really, for me, the area of most importance, it's the heartbeat of healthcare, it's the heartbeat of any organization, is your people, because your people are there, the ones that are delivering care, that are fulfilling that mission, taking care of patients. So I wanted to share a couple of pieces. McKinsey really put out a survey recently. It was 100 large private sector hospitals to understand how COVID was impacting volumes. And really at the end of the day, some of the most important issues that hospitals and healthcare providers are facing are workforce coverage, nursing workforce coverage. So 84% of the hospitals are struggling with nursing workforce coverage. 60% are struggling with clinical support staff coverage. And I will tell you, as an example, in the company that I was in, when we had the Omicron surge in, after Thanksgiving through the end of February, we had about 20% of our total workforce out sick from anywhere from 5 to 10 days. And if you apply that to our patient facing, which is the largest piece, it was even a larger percentage. And so you had that dynamic of people coming in and out because of COVID. And then you have the coverage issue because people are just throwing in the towel saying, I need to redirect. It's too stressful. I can't afford the economics between my child being in school, my child being out of school, and et cetera. The other piece which exacerbates this is around the comment here about patient-driven deferred care. And so not only is the workforce suffering, but you have patients, and especially we saw this in cancer care, who deferred care. You either they weren't going to the referring physicians, their primary care, or the specialists, they were deferring, and now they're coming back into the system, presenting with more complexity and in more advanced stages, and within an environment where workforce is challenging. So you can see a little bit on the left-hand side, how healthcare organizations are trying to really change their model, what's happening in their operations because of this. And on the right-hand side, there's a lot of money being thrown at this. There's a lot, we're increasing wages. We're seeing crazy things in the marketplaces with competitors trying to, do things like increasing people's compensation by 30% just to get somebody through the door, which it's not sustainable long-term. So you see all kinds of economics being thrown at people to make moves from one place to another. And then a lot of, trying all kinds of non-monetary things. So, how do organizations deal with this? So the workforce data analytics, I really think, and not it really, there needs to be a change in terms of how to understand the retention component and to keep. So traditionally, when we were dealing with this, we're looking at turnover rates, we're looking at things, okay, well, what departments, what supervisors, what position, what tenure, when they leave, why do they leave? And then you circle back, close loop. But that's not really a very proactive measure. You try to learn as people walk out the door, and you're always behind the 8 ball. I've spent many of my years in companies measuring employee engagement. Well, if you have a better engagement score, that means people will want to stay, and it measures employee sentiments, but it's a bit ambiguous and it's a little bit hard to measure. So, we would use 5 questions. Do you see yourself here in 2 years? Do you, feel that, if all things equal, would you stay at this company versus going to another if the job was the same? But it really measures personal motivation and maybe some discretionary effort, but it doesn't actually measure the output of engagement. And then, companies will spend a lot of time. You have all of this churn in your workforce. Well, let's figure out how to optimize. Where are we spending overtime? How can we share work differently? And really, the landscape of organizational strategy and retention is changing. And it really, I think that, starting with strategy, it really starts at the top with what your strategy is, what your skills are required to execute upon your vision, and then understanding where your pockets of talent lie and where that intersection of talent, skills, and performance are, so you can figure out where to invest and how to invest. And really around development for your leaders, understanding the skill sets you need to execute upon your vision, and then how to bring your leaders along so that they can be transformative. And do you measure engagement still, or there's a new concept that OC Tanner is talking a lot about. They just recently issued their 2022 Global Culture Report about measuring great work instead of engagement, because engagement measures are a measure of sentiment, but it doesn't necessarily make the connection to great work. And when you have a really engaged employee base, people do great work, not just because they're paid for it, because it's the fire in the belly, right? They feel this connection, they feel connected to the mission, they want to make a meaningful contribution. And it's just more than, well, I'm paid to do this work. So to me, that's a real big focus on culture, and really fostering retention so you can foster this great work and measuring it. So, I think the landscape of organizational analytics and workforce data analytics is really changing. So I think, a couple of things that and I'm going to make my screen just a little bit bigger. Sorry about that. I didn't realize that it was smaller. I think there's some powerful data learnings as you look at, some of the key stats. So these are some stats from O.C. Tanner. When employees feel less connected to their workplace, they feel less connected to the culture, less connected to the purpose, great work falls 90%, burnout increases 11 times, and the odds that that employee will leave within 3 years surges 6 times. And it is incredibly expensive and disruptive when you have turnover. You have 109% increase in organizational growth when great work is happening. I'm sorry, what was that? Oh. Organizations have 7.5 times increased likelihood of improving the employee experience when they meet certain needs, of giving some autonomy, giving connection, and allowing the teams to develop and master their area. So how do you recognize people? How do you develop people? Really critical in order to drive and foster retention and culture. And so, bottom line, this is a highly strategic area of analytics. My experience across the landscape is that few companies get it right. Oftentimes people look at human resources as sort of a transactional. They manage payroll, they manage some, overtime reporting, and they manage benefits, but it is an incredibly powerful and important area. And if I could say anything about data, this is a place that I think warrants a lot of strategic understanding and support. So that is one of my passions in terms of, as a leader, where I spend my time. Second area, rising costs in the system, downward pressure on reimbursement. Hospitals and healthcare providers across the country are really struggling. There's just a tremendous amount of complexity for practitioners with respect to payer arrangements. And when you think about the number of payers across the landscape, you'll have hospitals that are working with over 1,000 insurers. And then every plan within that insurer population is very different. There's a wide variation in negotiated rates with the hospitals. And depending on how big the hospital is and how much the size of covered lives, or how large the insurer is and how much leverage they have, the discounts negotiated can be very steep. And you have the Medicare, Medicaid population, where is an incredibly important population to serve, our elderly and our folks that have economic challenges. And yet for systems, it's really difficult to serve large populations and maintain sustainability so that they continue to fulfill that mission. So you see a lot of challenge in that space. And the hospitals are seeing tremendous losses. So the American Hospital Association estimated that in 2020, the losses were north of $300 billion. And in 2020, it was a particularly devastating time because hospitals were, instead of operating their full suite of service lines, surgery, et cetera, they were, overwhelmed with COVID patients that had a different economic impact on the hospital. So it's a really challenging environment for hospitals and operators because you can't sustain your mission long term. And as a CEO, I've had people say to me, oh my gosh, why are we focused on economics? Why are we focused on profit? And bottom line, I said, profit allows us to continue our mission because eventually we can't afford it. Eventually, if you don't have enough cash flow, you can't sustain. So it's a really hard balance in healthcare, and it's a really hard conversation with our people who are patient facing because you just want to do the right thing by your patients all the time, right? And so this is an area that systems and providers really are focused very much on understanding the strategic analytics between how to drive density, how to capture more covered lives, how to reach more patients, how to improve outcomes, and then control costs at every point in the system. Payment reform has been a really important area within the healthcare system, and really welcome in many ways with a focus on quality, but it creates a tremendous data burden and technology burden on all providers to just navigate through it. Just the sheer navigation of these of moving to value-based care. So I'm going to kind of walk you through a couple of examples. And, as just to give you a view, so the merit-based incentive payment system, which is the MIPS, really tried to change the way in which we reimburse clinicians for these Part B covered services. So you get rewarded on quality of patient care, and also you will get, or you may just hold steady with whatever your reimbursement was, or you actually owe money back if you did not have a good year in terms of navigating the metrics that are indications of quality. So during the year you'll be delivering service, you'll be billing on your CPT code schedule, and then at the end of the year you're providing this analysis to macro with respect to the performance quality. So look at quality, there's over 200 measures potentially in quality. So think about that, 200 measures that you're trying to get. Now, not every system has 200 measures, but I can tell you, and that's across all service lines. So if you're in a hospital with multiple service lines, it is a tremendous amount, things that we never measured before. Now, how do we measure? Measure every single month and evaluating closed loop. How do you make it better? So just in my business, where we were in radiology and oncology, we had probably, I don't know, close to 40 measures to choose from. And so we would measure everything. We measured everything because you get to pick the 6. You just get to pick 6, and you don't have to deliver all 40, but you're measuring everything. So you know what 6 you are best at. And every single year you can change which 6 you measure. A lot of data, right? And then cost. So basically how you cost based on claim submission, how you compare to benchmarks. Are you driving improvement activities? Are you promoting electronic interoperability, whether it be for e-prescriptions, the way you're participating in the healthcare information exchange? And then at the end, there's a complex patient bonus. So based on the medical complexity, et cetera. So all of this goes into this at the end. So this was a radical change for providers. And, I think about my company, and we were close to $1 billion in revenue. So we had some means to navigate, but think about a small physician practice, a sole practitioner. I think about my referring physician, my primary care, who is a sole practitioner, and probably never in a million years had the technology at his disposal to capture all of this data about his patients. And so, that's an important move from a quality perspective, but certainly it creates a lot of challenge for organizations. And then another example recently, and this is coming out in 2023, if CMS does not delay, but alternative payment models, and this is in the area of radiation therapy. So you may have a radiation therapy patient who comes in 1 time or comes in 40 times for their treatments. And there are a series of CPT codes that you would charge for their treatments, and you would get paid shortly after they were treated. Well, now this new radiation oncology model is saying, well, instead of just billing when you treat, we're going to change it up. There's an 8-step process you have to go through. We're going to look at data, and we're going to set a base rate based on cancer types. Well, no one cancer diagnosis is the same. No one cancer patient is the same. They're all arriving at different stages in their disease. Their tumors are in different locations, et cetera. But they're attempting to set base rates. They're attempting to set payment trends, utilization factors. So all of these areas where you are working, where your geography is, what your patient population looks like, your historical efficiency. Then there's withholdings just in case you don't bill correctly. et cetera, a huge amount of data and shift for providers in cancer care next year when we implement this. So this is a really important information, really important things to track, but not things that our operations have tracked historically. And then lastly, consumerism. So this has really changed the landscape of healthcare because, 20 years ago, when your doctor gave you a recommendation, you followed it. Today, the patients are on Google, they're talking to family members, they're on Facebook, they're on blogs. So as a CEO of a company that had a cancer care division, we employed bloggers. And, who would have thought 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that we would be employing bloggers? And we spend a lot of time on reputation management and social media and really, trying to reach out to patients in our ecosystem. So the buyer or patient behavior has changed. And so today in cancer, as an example, when there's a cancer diagnosis, yes, our patients are talking to their referring physicians, but they're talking to their family members, they're going to Google, they're researching, et cetera. So today, those buyers and our patients are now digital, and they're using online tools to get educated and evaluate their choices. There's been a big push on transparency from a pricing perspective. And so, there's stats around the buyer behavior. By the time the buyer has already chosen their preferred partner vendor before contacting them, and they're just looking for comparisons. And then the way we influence and like selling and marketing, but really influence. So today, 73% of the sales and marketing teams who use social selling tools and resources are outperforming their peers. So on the healthcare side, we're doing all kinds of things around Facebook, reputation management, Google AdWords, digital advertising, blogs, et cetera. We're doing a lot of direct to consumer patient outreach, which as my company, we never did before. And then the hospitals are spending a tremendous amount of time. We do a lot of communication on behalf of hospitals about the brand and the value proposition, email campaigns, Google ads, et cetera. So the landscape has changed dramatically, and the way in which we influence referring physicians to have them send their patients to our hospital sites, and the way we influence patients is changing. So I think, bottom line, as I think about this program, this competency in terms of strategic data analytics is crucial. It is absolutely crucial. There has never been a more robust time across the ecosystem to focus on data. And it is really, I think, absolutely critical in the quest for healthcare organizations to deliver exceptional patient care and sustain, because it's a really hard equation right now. And with that, as end of my remarks, any questions before I turn it over to Tom, or should we save questions for the end? Donna and Al, what would you prefer?
Either way is fine. If anyone has any questions at this point, let's just go ahead and take them. If not, we will turn to Tom and take sort of the opposite view, or the opposite look in a way into healthcare. Do we have any questions at the moment?
You're muted. We can't hear.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we do have a question.
We do have a question. Good.
From Rakeem.
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much. That was a very impressive talk, and I thought a very honest interpretation of the data used to support your points. So I have a kind of a lengthy question, kind of mixing about data and business leadership. So I had the experience of working with a business leader in the past, where I guess a fair way to say it is data was improperly used or distorted in order to achieve certain goals that to me and others, that were interacting with that business leader were, negatively influenced by. So that includes, employees, customers, business partners, and so forth. So I guess my question really is, from your experience in aggregate, or perhaps from like specific anecdotes that you might be able to share, how do you keep, I guess, honesty in terms of using data and using data to support your interpretations and to interact with your employees, your stakeholders, internal and external, and other business partners that you might have, and keep that honesty to yourself as well. And then in addition to that, how do you identify cases where data is suspicious or misrepresented or used in what might be a deceptive or manipulative way? Are there certain, because you mentioned you have experience with a lot of transactions, so are there certain questions you ask or certain type of skeptical mindset you might take in order to be able to ferret out truth and reality from what might be an exaggeration or a distortion? Because I'm sure everyone has an agenda, right? So you have to be able to when you're working with other people, to be able to find out what the truth is, and whether that's in business or in data science, that's always the case. You're trying to figure out what the truth is, and then communicate that data and that interpretation to other people in hopefully an honest way. And that's also difficult to do, even if you have the best intentions. So I'm just wondering what kind of thoughts or experiences you might have. That was a very lengthy question.
It's a really good question. And, the question that you have, so I tell people all the time, especially in the transaction world, PowerPoint makes everything look beautiful, right? When you use, I spend a lot of time communicating to investors, communicating to lenders, communicating to stakeholders. And oftentimes we have PowerPoint presentations, and there's this challenge that when you create something visually compelling in a graphic, people believe, right? So that's always a risk, right? And so I always tell people when I'm sitting in a presentation, especially, and I say like when I have a software vendor coming to sell me something, right? And it looks amazing on PowerPoint. Like, I want that, right? You have to unpack it. You have to do your diligence, right? You can't make decisions on a PowerPoint presentation, right? So I think your question about honesty with respect to the data. There are I have worked with people who have try to find the data that supports their position, right? And look, everybody has, when you spend enough time in a business, you have intuition, you have all these intangibles, your gut feel, and you've got data, and you're always putting it all together. And so me as a leader, I may have gut feels about something. I grew up in finance, right? So there's nothing, I don't make decisions on gut feels. I make decisions with data and my gut, and I try to validate, am I thinking about it correctly? And I say, does the data support how I'm feeling, right? Or am I too optimistic and, about a particular issue, and what is the data? Does the data tell me that I should be optimistic? I think that it's the intangible stuff about what you do with that data, which gets really hard, and it comes down to ethics, right? It comes down to your ethics and the integrity of your leadership and of your organization. And I tell people all the time that, I've spent a lot of time in my career in front of investors. You have to be willing to accept that it's not everything is going to go well. You just have to. No business has perfection, and there are going to be times when things don't go well, and you have to be willing to talk about that and accept that, and stand up as a leader that things aren't going well, because the data suggests, and not be afraid of that. You have to lean into that conversation, because when you sort of try to use data to kind of manipulate, everything's fancy, everything's great, eventually that will come back to bite you, and you destroy your credibility. And so I think there's a cultural element to the type of leaders that take that approach. It's not the kind of, I've been very fortunate to work in environments of integrity. I will tell you about a particular story at one point where I had many years ago, worked in an environment where the owner of the company, we were doing a transaction, and the owner of the company did not like how much inventory was sitting on the balance sheet, had too much. The buyers were going to get too much. And he wanted me as the CFO to change the numbers to reflect a more appropriate number so he would get paid more. Now, it takes a lot for anybody to battle those types of issues. And, you know, me personally, my view, I said, I've spent, you know, all of my career building my integrity, and I'm not going to change that now. And so, you know, myself and several of my leaders met and said, you know, if this is the path that you take, we need to resign. We can't be associated with this. And those are hard conversations for anybody in a company to have, right? And it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to take a hard stance and say no. But it's not always easy for people to do that. There's a lot of pressure when you have folks that don't operate with integrity. It was a blip, meaning most of the organizations that I worked with were tremendous, but we had just sold my company to this particular buyer, this particular owner who had a different view. And so, you know, I think that battling of using data inappropriately starts at the top. It's a cultural issue, and it's something that doesn't change if your leaders are not willing to change with that. I do think, you know, I've done a lot of transaction work, and gosh, you know, there's always surprises, right? You know, you never really know what you're getting till you get under the covers on the other side. I think especially on the transaction side, just a tremendous amount of diligence you have to do. You can't just take management presentations for their word. And not to say that people are misrepresenting, but you know, when you're presenting about your company, you're going to focus on all the positives, right? And you try to, you know, focus on all the positives, and hopefully during diligence, people will learn the negatives, and it won't be as difficult as, you know, as hard as overwhelming the positives. But the diligence side, you know, financial diligence is extremely important. Legal diligence is extremely important. IT diligence is extremely important. Things that we spend time on now, IT security, data governance, right? This whole data issue, data cleanliness, right? Is the, you know, really testing the master data management framework, which is something, honestly, 15 years ago, none of us looked at, but now we look at it because the information that we're receiving from the company is really based on the way the company governs data. So I have found, you ask, you know, how do you keep the organization honest? You have to keep people that are focused on data governance, who are focused on the definition of data and how it's going to be used. And it can't be the CEO. The CEO is a user, and the CFO, you know, the leaders are users of it and are, you know, should be saying, this is how we want to understand, this is what we need to understand about the business, but you have to have other people below it that are governing that data integrity. So that's an area that we've spent a lot of time on, and it doesn't, it's not as exciting to think about data governance, but it's a crucial piece. And so in several of my companies, we've had cross-functional teams that are responsible for clean data and how those data analytics are used, so that they're not misinterpreted. Because it's really easy to, you know, I've been in many data rich and information poor companies, and you know, trying to parse it all out is tricky.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. I would like to ask Tom if you would like to respond in any way to that question before jumping in.
Sure. I think I will actually speak to data governance issues. So when I speak, and there'll be a I think it was nice of you to say that, you know, we might have come from opposite perspectives, but I think actually we come from embedded perspectives. I mean, I think corporations operate in a policy context, and I work on the policy context, and I hope that we're able to, you know, we're able to dive into how folks in this program might select where they want to go. So a little bit about RAND. I mean, I think this is the best term to describe what RAND is. We operate much like a university, but we are a private, not-for-profit organization working in the public interest. Our goal is to publish research findings that can inform policy decision makers to make objective and informed decisions. And we do run a graduate school. We train PhD candidates in policy research, and we as an investigator in the organization, I am allowed to operate as a free entrepreneur, kind of a free agent. I go after the grants and contracts that I would like to pursue, the subject matter that I would like to study. And I get the support of an organization that functions way better than a university does. So I've been in both situations here as a student at several other universities as a student. I'm on the faculty at a university, and I was really relieved to come to RAND, where people complain that RAND has a form for everything. And I said, well, thank God RAND has a form for everything, because things get done. So that is the best way to think about RAND, but some folks think of us as a consultancy. I do not like this because I do not like to work for hire, I like to take on projects to answer research and policy questions. And I do have a work for hire client right now, and they are absolutely driving me nuts. I'm trying to respond to their ongoing organizational demands and needs, which is really compromising the science of the work that I'm doing. We are also a think tank insofar that we do have our own publishing house, and we fund our own work, and we do seek nonprofit and foundational support, philanthropic and foundational support to pursue questions of our own interests that aren't funded in the public sector. And then, you know, this is a bit of a hokey slide, but it's a nice way to get into what RAND is. RAND actually was founded in 1947 as a spin-off of something like DARPA, if folks know what DARPA is. Following World War II, folks who had been advising the US on national security and war issues did not want to lose momentum on the independent research that had been embedded in that effort. And so spun off this unit within the Department of Defense and operated for a few years as a unit of the Department of Defense. And then shortly, I think in 1953, spun off as a nonprofit organization. In 1965, it started its healthcare sector work. And today, we are comprised of several business units. They are listed here. These first four are kind of national security and defense oriented. These next three are social and economic well-being oriented. So healthcare, education, labor, and social and economic well-being being the social determinants of health and other population level policy research questions. And then we have two international divisions that work in other federal contexts. We do have, as I mentioned, a graduate school. I do not know how many students come through this, but it's, let's say, more than 20, but I could be off by an order of 2, or magnitude of a factor of 2 there. And so the graduate students at RAND are able to embed themselves as policy analysts into funded research projects. And I have one working for me now on 2 projects. And really terrific resource for researchers to have graduate students who are working toward shared goals. These are our locations. I'm located in the Boston office. Santa Monica, if anyone wants to move to sunny California, is our headquarters. And Rhonda, do you know the building in Santa Monica? Yeah, it's downtown. really great location to work, well-designed, LEED certified building, really terrific. And I love getting the opportunity to go to headquarters and spin out at lunch to go surfing at the beach. Okay, so this is a picture of RAND's annual revenue. And I only show you this, I do not want you to study it, but I only want to show you that the largest share of our funding is public and specifically federal. If you look at the bottommost part of this circle, you see $68.4 million comes from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. That is not the only source of health-related funding. Why is this not loading fully? There we are. The health-related funding amounts to about $185 million, and the largest share is U.S. federal. A lot of the federal federal health research funding comes from the Department of Defense, believe it or not. We are able to do quite interesting work on the health of active and non-active military personnel, as well as veterans in the largest healthcare system in the United States, the Veterans Affairs Health System. But we do also receive research funding from states and local governments, quite a bit from foundations and other nonprofits. This is often developmental work where we're trying to build a new research portfolio, and we go to foundations for early stage support. And then we have private sector contributions and international, small number. So what I really want to do here is kind of pick up on some of the themes that Rhonda talked about. I think what I want to do is really speak to similar themes, and you will recognize how they relate to some of Rhonda's talk. So just a couple of kind of hot and pressing issues on healthcare in the United States. I hope no one's surprised by this. When I was in graduate school in the early 2000s, this was not widely known that in the United States, when I say widely known, it was not widely known by consumers of healthcare, that in the United States, we spend about 2.7 times the median of comparable countries on healthcare per capita. And so I think, please, I won't see all your hands online, but please make a note and tell me later if this is a surprise to you. And if it's not a surprise, I would hand that over to policy researchers who have been making great strides in communicating to the public about what's going on in the US healthcare system. Health spending accounts for about 18% of the US gross domestic product. When Rhonda and I were graduating from the University of Massachusetts, this number was 12%. And you might ask yourself why two political scientists are working in healthcare. Well, that 6% of the US economy might explain it. There's a lot of money flows in healthcare, and it's growing every year more aggressively than any other sector in the economy. That means that jobs are opening up at all times in healthcare, that there's a room for a career trajectory that will take you 40 years at least. So I'm not saying this because I want to recruit folks into healthcare. I'm saying this to so that you can understand from a data-driven perspective why healthcare demands so much in terms of new employment and is always looking to acquire new skills and a labor force. But the reality is that we may be in healthcare because there was really a surge in our careers in spending on healthcare. And I want to say something else about that. Even during the COVID years, when the overall economy shrank, healthcare shrank as well by less than the overall economy. So it still gathered more of the overall economy. The share of spending that healthcare represents during post-COVID of all GDP is larger than at the start of COVID. despite the fact that the entire economy shrank. We still have, despite health reform, the Affordable Care Act, we still have 30 million uninsured people in the United States. And 51% of Americans get same-day care when it's needed versus 57% in comparable countries. I wouldn't call that exactly damning, but it seems like we should be doing at least as well as other countries. We do exceptionally well at keeping people alive. And this is disability adjusted life expectancy is 31% higher than median comparable countries. It really accelerates at the end of life. If you're 65 years old in the United States, your life expectancy is considerably greater than almost any other developed country, and that's because of the strength of end of life care in hospital settings. And this one is what I like to call the earthquake that has driven a lot of the work that I do. Americans get recommended care about 55% of the time. And this was first established in an Institute of Medicine report, I think it's on the next slide, right, called Crossing the Quality Chasm in 2001. And then it was replicated by a RAND team in 2003 in the New England Journal of Medicine, showing that the RAND team was able to show that in selected conditions, purposefully selected conditions, that Americans were getting 50%, were getting recommended care about 50% of the time. And the reason this is important, and especially for a data science group, is to understand what we mean when we say recommended care. What does it take to get clinical guidelines together? Well, it takes a mass of recently conducted clinical trials, right? And then after that, a series of systematic reviews and meta-analyses that summarize the results of clinical trials on a single subject. Out of that, clinical societies, the American Radiology, the American College of Radiology, oncologists, dermatologists, they all have clinical societies that will use synthesized data from clinical trials and other studies to come up with guidelines that are recommended for use in clinical settings, hospitals, clinicians' offices, primary care settings like community health centers and so on. If we are spending the kind of money that we do spend on health research, and I don't think I have that slide here, but it amounts to about $80 billion annually in the United States. We're spending an enormous amount doing health research. And if we are publishing at the rate we publish, and we do publish a dramatic increase every single day in new findings in this country. And if we are doing the work that we should be doing and producing guidelines that should be useful in clinical settings, why is it that actual practice meets expected guidelines about 50% of the time? And so that really is a policy question that has driven, this is the landmark RAND study that followed the Institute of Medicine report, that drives a lot of research and commentary in the policy environment. Are we conducting clinical trials that are useful in actual practice settings? Why is it that good guidance is not being taken up in practice settings? So RAND research really focuses in on that space, and our health research addresses some of these challenges in 3 policy areas: access to care, quality of care, and the affordability of care. And this is, for folks who like word clouds, this is a word cloud from our own publications that sort of summarizes the disciplines that we draw from to make the work that we do. We are heavily dominated by folks trained in economics, but you can see other disciplines here: political science, psychology. Statistics is a smaller, is referred to less often, but I would think that that's only because of its sort of background role as a support discipline. This is a sampling of some of the publications that have come out recently. Now, when I say recently, this is really selected. This dementia report I was part of came out in, I think, 2016. So it's in the last 5 or so years. And I just selected these because they may be of interest to folks. Something that Rhonda was talking about around, and Rakeem asked about around the manipulation of data, was addressed by a publication led by the president of RAND, Michael Rich, called Truth Decay. And that was about that problem, the problem of data manipulation in order to actually support a belief that's already been settled, but also around the overall decay of truth and facts and information, or evidence-driven information, at least in our public policy debates. These are ways to find out more about what's happening happening at RAND. There is an app called Policy Currents, RAND Policy Currents. We have a very large presence on the web, and you'll be able to, most of our publications, I think all of our publications are free to download. And you can find out about who's at RAND by searching on researcher profiles, which are really digestible snippets of the expertise individual researchers bring to bear. This is our website. I want to go back to, I've lost it now. Hold on. Yeah. So I want to ask folks to tell me a little bit about what you think is going on that would explain why Americans get care about 50% of the time, get recommended care about 50% of the time.
Out-of-pocket costs.
Out-of-pocket costs. You think there's a barrier, an affordability barrier? Okay. Okay, so when they get care, they do go to get care. There's still so this is a measure of people who have arrived at the healthcare setting and the care they're getting. So is the care they're delivered according to guidelines? So there is, yes, an additional burden of folks avoiding care because the out-of-pocket costs might prevent them from seeking care. But once they've sought care and actually gotten to a healthcare setting, they're getting the right care about 50% of the time. And why is that?
I just typed into chat. Sometimes people need prior approvals. Sometimes insurance companies reject what the doctor recommends.
So it's great. It's a great response. So this is about clinically supported recommendations. So these are recommendations that have already made their way through the policy context and are covered by insurance. These are the recommendations that insurance wants you to get. They're written according, they are the new quality standard for, let's say, mammography screening or PSAs screening. Yeah.
Well, there's still the issue of out-of-pocket expense with deductibles and copays. So the fact that a doctor recommends I need something, but my deductible is $7,500, like.
I see. So you come to care for a screening, but you may opt out of the screening because of the copay.
What they fear
yeah.
will be the cost.
Mm-hmm. That is, yes, that's possibly a contributor. Yeah. Yeah.
Like trust and access to the ability to go in and complete a trial or go in for however many weeks or months it requires, or whether or not you trust the system and the recommendations of doctors.
Okay.
Also changed.
Sure. Yep. Trust is a huge issue for consumers.
Lissy has a comment or question. Go ahead, Lissy.
Well, it makes me think just a little bit about the systemic support for healthcare and treatment, meaning that if you can't get time off from work, for example, so that you're being recommended a particular kind of treatment, but you are somebody who works, say, for an hourly wage, obviously copays become challenging, but also the idea of if you have to miss work and you don't have support for that as well. I think about also transportation and access and that kind of thing, those kinds of things as well.
Yep. These are all great answers. I am going to share another presentation.
Tom,
Yep.
while you were looking at that, I believe Abhinav might also have a question. Abhinav, do you want to ask that now?
Sure, go ahead with another question.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Donna. Thank you for letting me ask this question. So this question is for both Tom and Rhonda, because you both are leaders in your own domains. In the area of analytics, data science, and machine learning, when we are working in organizations, we prepare a lot of data assets, right? So my one question is that when we prepare these data assets, right, what my personal experience has been that we never get to evaluate the impact and outcome of those data assets that we prepare, okay? So the first question is, how do you within your respective organizations, track that? And the second is that I started working in the industry since 2003. And I always, thought, and I had this idea in my mind that there's always a deep divide between academia and industry, right? So when you talk about ideas of data governance and all, these are probably things that are proactively not being discussed in the academia area. So what would your suggestion be for the academia so that we can bridge those kind of gaps?
Yeah, so I want to, I think you're actually, you're asking a terrific question. And what I'm showing you right here is a chain that the NIH uses to describe how knowledge builds over the course of research from basic science all the way to population health in healthcare, okay? And they call it, each node of this chain, they call it T phase, representing some translation from some research setting to another research setting. And it's meant to represent the translation of information from one setting to another. So from basic science to early stage clinical discovery in humans, to phase 2, phase 3 trials sponsored by industry, typically in patients, to practice setting based research, to population based research. And one of the things you are speaking about is what's been called the Valley of Death. Rhonda, have you seen that before? So where data or data resources are built in academic medical settings and lost to industry in the translation of the first steps of translation. And this was a problem identified in 2007. I want to say that this quality chasm report identified another translational barrier, and a report on inequity in healthcare delivery was another translational barrier, blocking translation at other stages of this work. And I think, so one of the solutions, one among many, is the notion that you, in the development of data resources, in the development of research questions, in the conduct and dissemination of research data, that you build teams that network the folks, the users of the product you're making, right? So that, if you're a data scientist and you're building a research resource, a data resource, you need connections to the folks working. Let's say you're building a mouse model in silico, right? And you need connections to folks who work in laboratory settings, in industry, so that you can map the use and impact of the resource that you've developed. So one of the solutions that's meant to break down translational roadblocks, or the accumulation of evidence, or the acceleration of evidence from bench to bedside, is to build teams across these translational steps. Rhonda, do you want to add to that?
No, I think you're spot on, Tom. And you know, I think about, I'll give you sort of an interesting comment that in the early part of my career, I was meeting with somebody at my very first company who worked in data. And I think about this comment all the time because he said to me, it doesn't really matter. We could be selling, this is what his quote, we could be selling hot air balloons. I just pull the data. That is, when I think about that comment today in data and in the corporate setting, our data people have to understand the business. They like talk about that connectivity. They need to understand the patient. They need to understand the hospital. They need to understand the landscape, all the different functions. It won't be effective without that. They're not just manipulating data, they're internalizing the needs of the users, how the companies, you know, what type of assets they need to understand. So that is an absolute critical component for, I think, you know, effective data capture, data manipulation, data governance, is that our data experts are embedded. They're embedded with they are some of the most critical resources. And I think about our data team, and they are in absolute high demand. Everybody wants to partner with them. And you have to have skills as a data person, a data professional, to be able to communicate and navigate complexity and kind of break it down, right? You know, because, you know, the users come in with, so I agree with you, Tom, that connectivity with, you know, the users is absolutely critical.
Right, and I just wanted to add to this question, these comments that you made, Rhonda, as well about governance. So, you know, Rhonda's absolutely right. Data scientists have to be embedded in the company culture or in the workplace culture to understand the mission they're chasing or supporting. You know, so one of the challenges that's been posed to folks working in the practice research setting, so this is the T3 phase of translation, has been to knit data outputs from electronic health records across multiple health systems, right? So Brigham and Women's Hospital sharing with Mass General, with Tufts. There are 5 academic medical centers within a mile of each other in Boston. Just getting over the technical issues of sharing a common data model across those settings is not the biggest challenge of getting shared data for research and practice settings. The biggest challenge are the governance issues. It's patient safety, it's so legal governance issues. It's also regulatory compliance, making sure that you do not release information that is going to, never mind breaking rules, but breaking laws, but breaking rules that you have to be responsive to, but also proprietary requirements. Your own organization will have lawyers who want to protect its, you know, own proprietary information. Getting past the lawyers to share data and provide a resource like this for population level research is insanely difficult. And I know because I tried in Chicago with 11 community health, 11 academic medical centers and health centers. But it's also important to not be focused only on the governance issues, because data manipulation, analysis, and use are also embedded in policy contexts. And you can think about policy 2 ways. You can think about it on the ground at the organizational level. What is the organizational policy context? What has for instance, the organization, let's say I work in an organization that has set diversity, equity, and inclusion principles as a lens through which now we will look at everything we do. So we will take another look at the way we build research up from the ground from an equity lens. This is an internal policy context that we have to be responsive to. So even data scientists have to actually adopt that kind of perspective in the work that we're doing. But also that's on the ground, that's organizational, that's local context, policy context, but also to try to understand what the 30,000-foot aerial context is as well. And for those of you who are interested in trying to solve these 30,000-foot problems, like will healthcare continue to consume more and more of GDP, crowding out housing, crowding out education, crowding out food, or will we find ways at a sort of really a 30,000-foot level, ways to restrain the growth of health spending relative to GDP? And you know, so I did want to sort of touch on the notion that data scientists are working at all of these levels, and they really are fundamentally different questions. I would go back to the pressures that healthcare organizations, the financial pressures that healthcare organizations are facing around staffing, around optimizing staffing levels. I've done quite a bit of work in long-term care facilities, and you know, the frontline staff in long-term care facilities are often immigrants, people of color, and women. And what do you think is going on in the payment level of frontline work in long-term care? It's extremely low. It's extremely low. Is that really the right kind of policy pressure on labor at the front line? You know, a bed in one of these facilities costs, a bed in a shared room costs $11,000 a month. 11,000, and it's private pay in most cases. So where, you know, what kind of transparency and accountability are we asking for from the organizations that run long-term care facilities? How is the money being spent? And why is it not reaching the front line? Those are policy questions that you could ask as well.
Thank you so much for the answer.
Sure. Other questions?
I just said, I think it's more of a comment, which is coming in from the mental health perspective of, you know, particularly as we've gone through COVID, the question of mental health and treatment for, you know, everybody basically has become really, really important. And I think like physical health, you know, people, they're losing practitioners. And I think it's a really interesting question too, of how our, you know, we say we want mental health practitioners, but knowing certainly in Massachusetts, how people are trained and have to get through licensure and how difficult that is with no, like pretty much no financial support, particularly for master's level clinicians. I don't know, everything you were saying was just really resonating for me of thinking about going through that process myself and, you know, saying like, my thing was, I did not want to work for free with a PhD. I really did want to make a little bit of money as a postdoc when I was getting my hours, and that was hard to do. And so thinking about, you know, we say we want to support healthcare workers, we want to support mental health care, but we're not doing it financially, certainly.
Thank you for that, Lucy. Any other questions? I do want to say we are bumping right up against 1:30, and I do want to be cognizant of everyone's time. I know, Tom, you've got commitments coming up. Are there any final quick questions, comments? Other than to say this was a lot of information.
A lot of information.
Fascinating information. I hope you all felt the same way. We do have recording for those of you who want to take it in a second time. I think I know I need to, just to get the depth of all this. But thank you, Tom. Thank you, Rhonda. Any final comments from either of the two of you?
No, thanks.
And Tom, I want to compare notes with you.
I would love to sit down and start thinking about some of these problems. We might ask you to join one of our long-term care.
I would love it.
Yeah.
I would love it. Yeah. No, that would be exciting. And
Great. All right.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
thank you.
much. Thank you all for joining us.
Okay.
But that's why I have loved coming to the. I learned so much myself. It's great.
Great. Right.
Hey, Tom?
Yeah, I was a new got
I
her
think-
PhD at
Oh,
Rand,
sorry.
and I think she got her undergrad at Tufts.
Oh, is that right? There's someone online, I think, with a question.
Oh, we're still on.
Are we still on?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask something quickly. It was as long as you were still on, Tom,
Sure.
if you know, you just, do you still have the slides? I just wanted to see that slide again with individual examples of directors at Rand. Do you have that? Is it easy enough? Otherwise I could look at it on the.
Yeah,
picture.
those actually, that was not a great sample. So those were, let's see, that was about 8 people. When I take a look at that slide, I think it's, you know, those
Out
are
of date?
people, I know them. You were.
Well, I saw an old, I was asking just from personal, I saw an old friend on there, and so I was
You
curious.
really? Okay, let me see.
Carrie Farmer, she was on the.
Oh,
on
Carrie
left.
Farmer, yeah.
I think she's still working at but I've known her for many years, and
Oh, terrific. She, I can put you in touch with her. She's a close friend. We actually went through the PhD program at Harvard.
oh, great. Yeah. Well, I went back to I actually am. I am still in touch because I knew her back then, and I went
Yeah.
to her first wedding, and then
I was at that wedding as well.
and then okay, yeah.
That's hilarious.
Where her limousine caught on fire.
The limousine fire, that was hilarious, right?
And then I was in.
Actually, if I
actually
could,
am on I'm on Facebook with her. I was just curious if what she was doing there, but maybe it's you know, it may have developed since then. I didn't know what we've been a little bit out of touch, but yeah. And then I lived in Pittsburgh for a number of years.
Great.
And used to go, I was in the stats program at CMU, and I used to go to the Rand stats talks there. So anyway, very nice to meet you.
Sure. Carrie is now the associate director of Rand Health.
very
And
cool.
manages the quality unit subdivision of the unit.
Awesome. And still in Pittsburgh, I imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for coming. It was really great I enjoyed your talks a lot. Take care.
Nice to meet you, Justin.
Alrighty.